In 1937, the nearest doctor to Harlan County, Kentucky, was a 14-hour mule ride through mud and timber. If your child had a fever at midnight, you walked to the back porch, pulled dried leaves from a tobacco tin nailed to the wall, and brewed something your grandmother taught you to make before you could read. Today, pharmacologists at Duke and Vanderbilt are quietly confirming what those women knew by firelight. Number 17 on this list contains a compound now used in one of the best-selling cough suppressants on the planet. Number 8 was dismissed as backwoods superstition until a clinical trial proved it reduces cold duration by nearly 40%. And number 3 was so effective against infection that the United States military studied it during World War II. These plants grew wild on every ridge and hollow from Georgia to West Virginia. They cost nothing, they required no prescription, and they worked. Before we begin, subscribe, because what you are about to learn grew 10 feet from your great-grandmother's front door. Number 25, plantain leaf. Not the banana, the broad-ribbed weed that grew in every trampled yard and wagon path across the southern mountains. When a child stepped on a yellow jacket nest barefoot, and every child did at least once a summer, their mother grabbed a plantain leaf, chewed it to a pulp, and pressed the poultice directly on the sting. The enzymes in the saliva activated compounds in the leaf that drew venom and reduced swelling within minutes. Old-timers called it white man's footprint because it seemed to grow wherever people walked. It treated bee stings, spider bites, splinters that had gone septic, and the raw, blistered skin that came from working timber in wet boots. A handful of leaves cost nothing and grew back within days of picking. Modern herbalists now confirm that plantain contains allantoin, the same compound found in high-end wound creams that sell for $12 a tube. Your great-grandmother had it growing in the dirt beside the outhouse. Number 24, mullein. That tall, fuzzy-leafed stalk that shot up 6 feet along roadsides and abandoned fields was the Appalachian answer to every chest cold that rattled through the cabin from November to March. Mothers dried the large, velvety leaves, crumbled them into a clay mug, and poured boiling water over the top. The tea loosened phlegm and calmed the dry, hacking cough that kept children awake through freezing nights. Some families smoked the dried leaves in a corncob pipe, drawing the vapor deep into the lungs for bronchitis so stubborn that weeks of coughing left ribs sore. The fine hairs on the leaf needed straining through muslin, otherwise they irritated the throat worse than the cough itself. Everyone had their own patch. Pharmacological research has since identified verbascoside in mullein, an anti-inflammatory compound that explains exactly why that smoky, bitter tea worked when nothing else would. Number 23, jewelweed. Wherever poison ivy grew in the mountains, jewelweed grew within arm's reach, as if the forest knew people would need it. The translucent, orange-flowered plant held a watery sap inside its stems that stopped a poison ivy rash from spreading if applied immediately after contact. Mothers taught children to recognize it before they taught them to read. Snap the stem, rub the juice on the skin. Do not scratch. That was the rule. Families who worked ginseng patches deep in the laurel thickets carried crushed jewelweed stems in their pockets like insurance. Some women boiled it down into a concentrate and stored it in mason jars for winter. Modern dermatology studies have found that jewelweed contains lawson, a compound with legitimate anti-inflammatory and antihistamine properties. The mountains provided the cure right next to the poison. Number 22, sassafras. Every spring, families across Appalachia dug sassafras roots to make the tea that marked the turning of the season. The belief was firm and universal. After a long winter of heavy food, salt pork, dried beans, and biscuits, the blood turned sluggish and thick. Sassafras tea thinned the blood and cleaned the body for warmer months. Fathers and grandfathers dug the roots, scrubbed them, and shaved the rust-colored bark into pots of boiling water. The kitchen filled with a sweet root beer-like aroma that children associated with the first warm days of March. By 1960, the FDA flagged saffrole, a compound in sassafras, as a potential carcinogen in massive laboratory doses. The old spring ritual began to fade, but for 200 years before that ruling, sassafras tea was the most universally consumed medicinal drink in the mountains. Some families never stopped. They knew. Number 21st, yellow root. The bitter, golden-hearted root that grew along cold mountain streams was the sore throat remedy of the entire southern Appalachian range. Mothers dug the roots in fall, when the alkaloid concentration was highest, dried them, and steeped pieces in hot water until the liquid turned deep amber. Children winced at the taste. It was aggressively bitter, but a gargle of yellow root tea could knock out a raw, infected throat overnight. Families used it for mouth sores, gum infections, and stomach ailments so reliably that it became currency in some communities. A bundle of dried yellow root could be traded for eggs or flour. The plant contains berberine, an alkaloid now sold in capsule form at health food stores for $15 a bottle. Your great-grandmother pulled it from a creek bank for free. Number 20. Spice bush. The aromatic shrub that dotted moist bottomlands and cove forests served as Appalachia's fever reducer long before aspirin arrived by mail order. Mothers stripped the bark and twigs, simmered them in water, and gave the warm, spicy tea to children burning with fever. The taste was pleasant, almost like allspice, which made it one of the few remedies children did not fight. During influenza outbreaks in the early 1900s, when families were too isolated to reach a physician, spicebush tea was sometimes the only treatment available. Women passed the knowledge from cabin to cabin: boil the bark, cool it enough to drink, keep the child covered and sweating. By morning, the fever usually broke. Spicebush berries were also dried and ground as a seasoning, substituting for allspice in pies and preserves. One plant served the kitchen and the medicine shelf. Nothing had just one job. Number 19. Boneset. When the bone-deep ache of influenza settled into a body, mountain families reached for boneset, a bitter, white-flowered plant that grew in damp meadows and along fence lines. The name came from breakbone fever, when the pain was so severe patients felt their bones were cracking. Mothers brewed the dried leaves into a hot tea that induced heavy sweating, because that was the entire point. The belief was that the fever needed to break through the skin, and boneset helped force it out. During the 1918 influenza pandemic, Appalachian communities relied on boneset tea as their primary treatment when hospitals were unreachable. A study in the journal Phytomedicine found that boneset contains sesquiterpene lactonase with measurable immunostimulant properties. The old women were not guessing. They were practicing medicine with the tools the mountains gave them. Number 18. Witch hazel. The crooked, spindly tree that bloomed yellow in late autumn, when everything else had gone bare, provided one of the most widely used topical remedies in the mountains. Mothers simmered the bark and twigs, strained the liquid, and applied it to cuts, bruises, hemorrhoids, and the swollen varicose veins that came from years of standing over cook stoves and wash tubs. The astringent tightened tissue on contact, reducing swelling and stopping minor bleeding. Mountain families had been using the homemade version for generations before commercially distilled witch hazel appeared in drugstores in the 1930s. Children got it dabbed on scrapes. Fathers used it on saw cuts. Midwives kept it beside the birthing bed. The fact that witch hazel is now a billion-dollar skincare ingredient would not have surprised any Appalachian grandmother. She already knew it worked. First pattern break. Here is where things get serious. That old woman in every community, the one people called a granny woman or herb doctor, was not guessing, and she was not performing magic. She carried an unbroken chain of botanical knowledge that stretched back centuries, blending Cherokee, Scots-Irish, and African traditions into a working pharmacopoeia. These women delivered babies, set bones, treated pneumonia, and managed wounds with nothing but what the forest provided. When researchers from the Berea College Appalachian Studies program began documenting this knowledge in the 1970s, they found that communities with active granny women had developed treatment protocols remarkably consistent with modern herbal medicine. The same plant, prepared the same way, used for the same ailment, appeared across counties separated by mountains too steep for roads. This was not luck. It was science without a laboratory. Number 16, fire cider. Not a plant itself, but a preparation so universal across the mountains that leaving it out would be dishonest. Families packed a mason jar with raw garlic, onion, horseradish root, hot peppers, and ginger, then covered everything in raw apple cider vinegar. The jar sat for 4 to 6 weeks, shaken daily, until the vinegar absorbed every sharp, burning compound those roots had to offer. A tablespoon at the first sign of a cold was the standard dose. Children gagged, adults grimaced. The combination of allicin from garlic, capsaicin from peppers, and acetic acid from the vinegar created a genuine antimicrobial and circulatory stimulant. The ingredients cost almost nothing because most of them grew in the garden. Modern herbalists have rebranded fire cider as an artisanal wellness tonic. A 16-ounce bottle now sells for $22 at health food stores. Your great-grandmother made it in a barn. Number 15, black cohosh. The tall, white-spired plant that grew in deep forest shade was the women's medicine of Appalachia. Mothers and grandmothers dug the dark, knotted root, dried it, and brewed a tea used to ease menstrual cramps, regulate irregular cycles, and soothe the hot flashes of menopause. This knowledge passed exclusively between women, whispered in kitchens and over garden fences, rarely written down. By the time a girl reached her early teens, she knew where black cohosh grew and how to prepare it. The Cherokee used it long before European settlers arrived, and the traditions merged seamlessly in mountain communities. Today, black cohosh extract is one of the best-selling herbal supplements in the world for menopausal symptoms. Clinical trials in Germany confirmed its effectiveness decades ago. The women of Appalachia needed no trial. They had 300 years of evidence, served 1 cup at a time. Number 14, white pine. Every cabin within sight of a white pine stand had access to a cough remedy that worked within hours. Mothers stripped the inner bark, the soft, moist layer just beneath the rough outer shell, and simmered it into a thick, resinous tea sweetened with wild honey. The combination coated irritated throats and suppressed the coughing reflex that kept entire families awake through January. White pine needles were also steeped for a tea rich in vitamin C, a critical nutrient during winters when fresh fruit was non-existent and scurvy was a quiet threat. Children gathered the needles, mothers brewed the remedy, the whole household benefited from a tree that grew so commonly nobody thought to call it medicine. But that is exactly what it was. No plant carried more weight in Appalachian culture than ginseng. It was medicine, It was money and it was identity. Mountain families dug the slow-growing root from shaded north-facing slopes, cleaned it carefully to preserve the shape, and either used it medicinally or sold it to traders who shipped it to China. By the 1890s, dried ginseng sold for as much as $6 a pound, a fortune when a day's logging wage was 75 cents. Families used ginseng tea as a general tonic for fatigue, weakness, and recovery from illness. Men chewed small pieces before long days of physical labor. Modern research classifies ginseng as an adaptogen. Ginsenosides, the active compounds, have been shown to support immune function and reduce fatigue in clinical trials. The mountain families who guarded their ginseng patches like gold were not just protecting income, they were protecting a pharmacy that regenerated itself every autumn. Number 12. Slippery elm. The inner bark of this common Appalachian tree became the remedy for every digestive complaint that plagued mountain families through months of heavy preserved food. Mothers stripped the bark in spring, dried it, and ground it into a fine powder. Mixed with hot water, it produced a thick, mucilaginous gruel that coated the stomach and soothed ulcers, acid reflux, and the chronic indigestion that came from a diet heavy in salt pork and cornbread. Slippery elm was also the go-to poultice for boils, infected wounds, and burns. The thick paste held moisture against the skin, preventing the wound from drying and cracking. The knowledge of which trees to harvest and how much bark to take without killing the tree was passed down carefully. Take too much and you lost a medicine source forever. That restraint, that understanding of sustainability before anyone used the word, defined how Appalachian communities interacted with the forest. Second pattern break. Controversy incoming. Here is what the medical establishment does not want to discuss openly. Modern doctors finally reached remote Appalachian communities in the 1930s and 1940s, many through the Frontier Nursing Service founded by Mary Breckinridge. They found populations that had survived for generations without licensed physicians. Infant mortality was high, absolutely. Infectious disease took lives that antibiotics would later save. Nobody is romanticizing that. But these communities had developed effective treatments for the everyday ailments that make up the vast majority of medical visits even today. The granny women were not replacements for surgeons. For primary care, they were astonishingly competent. When pharmaceutical companies moved into the region, they did not study what was working. They sold replacements for it, and the knowledge did not transfer. It was overwritten. Number 11. Bloodroot. The small spring wildflower with white petals and a root that bled brilliant orange-red sap was one of the most potent and dangerous plants in the mountain medicine chest. Granny women used tiny amounts of the root externally to treat warts, skin tags, and fungal infections. The sap was caustic enough to destroy abnormal tissue on contact. But dosage was everything. Too much bloodroot burned healthy skin and left scars. The knowledge of exactly how much to use was the difference between a cure and a wound. Cherokee healers used bloodroot long before European contact, and the compound sanguinarine that gives it that blood-red color has since been studied for antimicrobial and anti-tumor properties. This was not a casual remedy. It required expertise and the kind of judgment that came only from years of apprenticeship with an elder who had learned it the same way. Number 10. Wild cherry. Bark. The cough. Suppressant that mountain families trusted above all others came from the bark of the black cherry tree. Mothers collected bark in the fall, dried it, and steeped it in hot water to make a tea that calmed persistent coughs and quieted bronchial spasms. Wild cherry bark contains prunicin, which converts to hydrocyanic acid in small, controlled amounts, suppressing the cough reflex at the neurological level. This is the same mechanism used in modern cough syrups. In fact, wild cherry flavoring was added to commercial cough medicine because patients already associated the taste with relief. The pharmaceutical industry borrowed the flavor because the original remedy was that deeply embedded in American memory. Your great-grandmother's cough syrup did not just inspire the commercial version, it was the commercial version, decades before anyone thought to patent it. Number 9. Yellow dock. The deep-rooted weed with curled leaves that grew along ditches and disturbed ground served as Appalachia's iron supplement. Mothers dug the long taproot, simmered it, and gave the dark, bitter tea to children and women who showed signs of anemia. Yellow dock root is rich in bioavailable iron, and the oxalic acid in the plant actually enhances iron absorption in moderate doses. Pregnant women drank it throughout their terms. New mothers drank it after delivery to rebuild strength. The plant grew so aggressively that farmers considered it a nuisance, never realizing they were cursing one of the most nutritionally valuable medicines on their property. Number 8. Elderberry. The dark purple berries that hung in heavy clusters along creek banks and forest edges became the flu remedy that modern science has finally validated. Mountain families cooked elderberry into thick syrup sweetened with honey and stored them in mason jars for winter. At the first sign of fever, chills, or body aches, mothers gave a tablespoon every few hours. The syrup tasted good enough that children did not resist. In 2004, a study in the Journal of International Medical Research found that elderberry extract reduced influenza symptoms by an average of 4 days. Later studies confirmed that compounds in elderberry inhibit viral replication by preventing the virus from entering host cells. The mountain remedy was not folk magic. It was antiviral medicine served from a mason jar. Families who kept elderberry syrup stocked through winter were practicing preventive care a century before the term existed. Number 7. Comfrey. Known in the mountains as knit bone, comfrey was the poultice plant for broken bones, sprains, and deep bruises. Mothers mashed the large, hairy leaves into a paste, sometimes mixing them with lard or beeswax, and applied the poultice directly to the injured area, wrapping it tight with strips of cloth. The allantoin in comfrey stimulated cell regeneration and reduced inflammation. Families who lived miles from any doctor relied on comfrey to heal fractures that would have otherwise gone untreated. Children fell from trees. Men were kicked by mules. Women slipped on icy creek rocks carrying water. Comfrey patches grew beside every cabin because injuries were not occasional events. They were constant. Modern research has confirmed comfrey's effectiveness for musculoskeletal injuries, though internal use is now discouraged due to liver toxicity concerns. But as an external poultice, your great-grandmother's method holds up against anything on a pharmacy shelf. Number 6. Yarrow. The feathery white wildflower that covered meadows and roadsides was the battlefield medic of the mountains. When a man cut himself with an axe, when a child gashed a knee on a rock, yarrow was the first response. Fresh leaves were crushed and pressed into the wound. The bleeding slowed, often stopped entirely within minutes. The plant contains achillein and other alkaloids that promote blood clotting and reduce inflammation. Named after Achilles, who supposedly used it to treat his soldiers' wounds, yarrow earned its reputation in Appalachia the same way, through use, through repetition, through generations of proof. Dried yarrow was also brewed into a tea for fevers. but its primary role was stopping blood. In communities where a deep cut could become life-threatening without medical intervention, yarrow was not a home remedy. It was emergency medicine. Third pattern break. The remarkable thing about this list is not that these plants worked. It is that the knowledge of how to use them was systematically erased within a single generation. Between 1940 and 1970, as roads reached remote hollows and television brought national advertising into cabins that had never seen a magazine, the old ways were deliberately reframed as ignorance. Pharmaceutical advertising told families that modern medicine had replaced everything their grandmothers knew. The granny women did not stop knowing. Their grandchildren simply stopped asking. Number 5. Pennyroyal. This small, pungent member of the mint family carried a weight in mountain communities that went far beyond its size. Mothers brewed pennyroyal tea as a remedy for colds, fevers, and headaches. The strong, menthol-like aroma cleared congested sinuses when inhaled from a steaming mug. But pennyroyal also served a more private purpose, known to women and spoken of only in guarded conversations. In communities where birth control was inaccessible and family planning was a matter of economic survival, pennyroyal occupied a complicated, sometimes dangerous role. The essential oil in concentrated form is toxic, and the line between a medicinal dose and a harmful one is dangerously thin. Its presence on this list reflects the reality that mountain women needed medicine for every aspect of their lives, and the forest provided even when society did not. Number 4. Golden seal. The small woodland plant with a bright yellow root was the broad-spectrum antibiotic of the mountains. Mothers used golden seal for eye infections, washing inflamed eyes with a weak tea that reduced redness and discharge. They used it for skin infections, digestive ailments, and as a general immune booster during illness. The root contains berberine and hydrostein, alkaloids with confirmed antimicrobial properties effective against a range of bacteria and fungi. By the early 1900s, demand had made it one of the most commercially valuable wild plants in the eastern United States. Overharvesting nearly wiped it out in some counties. The irony is painful. The very effectiveness that made golden seal essential to mountain medicine made it profitable enough to nearly destroy. Today, wild golden seal is protected in several states. The families who once dug it freely now watch it disappear behind regulations created because the outside world finally realized what Appalachia always knew. Number 3. White oak bark. The astringent, tannin-rich bark of the white oak was the antiseptic wash that mountain families trusted for open wounds, burns, and infections. Mothers boiled the bark until the water turned dark brown, let it cool, and used the liquid to clean wounds that would have otherwise required a doctor. The high tannin concentration created an environment hostile to bacteria, sterilizing the wound while tightening surrounding tissue to promote healing. During World War II, military researchers studied tannin-based treatments for battlefield wounds and confirmed significant antibacterial properties. The old women who had been washing wounds with oak bark tea for 2 centuries did not need the validation. But the science came around eventually. White oak grew everywhere in the mountains. The medicine was literally overhead, available to anyone who knew enough to reach for it. Number 2. Poker root. Dangerous, powerful, and respected, poker root occupied a category all its own in mountain medicine. The mature plant was poisonous. Every child knew that. But the root, harvested carefully and prepared in tiny, precisely measured doses, served as a potent treatment for severe sore throats, swollen glands, and what families called the rising, likely referring to lymphatic infections. Externally, poker root poultices were used for mastitis, joint inflammation, and stubborn skin conditions. The preparation required absolute precision. Too much, and the patient suffered nausea, vomiting, and worse. Too little, and it did nothing. Only experienced granny women handled poke medicinally. It represented the most advanced level of Appalachian herbal knowledge. Modern researchers have isolated antiviral and anti-inflammatory compounds in pokeweed, including proteins studied for potential anti-cancer applications. The most dangerous remedy on this list might also prove to be the most significant. Number 1. White willow bark. Before aspirin existed as a word, before Bayer filed a single patent, mountain families chewed strips of white willow bark to kill pain and reduce fever. The bark contains salicin, which the body converts to salicylic acid, the same active compound that became the foundation of aspirin. Mothers brewed the bark into tea for headaches, toothaches, joint pain, and the fevers that swept through communities every winter. A strip of bark, the length of a finger, chewed slowly, could dull a throbbing toothache enough to get through a day of work. Willow trees grew along every creek and river bottom in Appalachia. The medicine was free and effective. When Felix Hoffmann synthesized acetylsalicylic acid for Bayer in 1897, he was refining a compound that mountain communities had been using for centuries. Aspirin did not replace folk medicine. It was born from it. And the families who peeled willow bark by lantern light, who brewed it over wood stoves for children shaking with fever, they were the original pharmacists. They did not have degrees. They had results. Here's my challenge. Walk outside this week. Look at what is growing along your fence line, your creek bank, your tree line. Chances are at least 3 plants on this list are within 100 yards of where you are sitting right now. Plantain in the yard, yarrow by the road, elderberries along the creek. Your great-grandmother did not need a pharmacy. She needed her eyes open and the knowledge that someone before her took the time to pass down. Share this with someone whose family comes from the mountains. Ask your grandmother what she remembers, because this knowledge is not gone yet. It is just one generation away from silence.